the Riviera House is about a young woman called Eliane who has been forced to give up her dreams of being a painter in order to support her family. She works at the Louvre and it's August 1939, and the first sign that something catastrophic is about to happen is when Eliane is asked to help the director of the Louvre to evacuate all of the paintings and artworks from the museum to hide them in the French countryside. Everything, even including the famous Mona Lisa, is sent down to the French countryside. Not long after that, the Nazis invade Paris, and Eliane is asked to leave the Louvre and go to work at a different art museum called the Jeu de Paume. She approaches the museum and sees outside that there's a lot of armed guards from the Luftwaffe guarding the museum. And then inside the museum, there is the most astonishing collection of artwork she's ever seen. Paintings by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Van Gogh, more art than one of the most famous museums in the world could possibly gather together for an exhibition. And so from that point on, Eliane is drawn into a dangerous mission to work with the French resistance to find out why the artworks are there, who they've been taken from, and where they're being sent to, and to try to do what she can to save France's artistic heritage. There were so many incredibly fascinating elements to it. I mean, just starting with the evacuation of the Louvre, for instance, and reading about and seeing photographs in the Louvre archives in Paris of the crate they built, for example, around the winged victory of Samothrace, and the ramp they built on the famous Daru staircase, which the statue sits at the top of that staircase, and then they had to winch 3.5 tons of stone up in this frame and then transport it down this massive staircase. And you could, looking at those photographs, you could literally imagine how it must have felt to be at the bottom of those steps watching this world famous statue descend so it could be evacuated, and praying that it wasn't going to break. And how that, I imagined it must have felt like some kind of sign almost that they were able to successfully get it down the staircase. So maybe that meant that some kind of larger success would come at the end of the war. And also, I really lost myself in Rose Valland's story as well, because she was an incredibly brave, real life person who is a character in the book, who actually did work at the Jeu de Paume Museum and helped the French resistance to track those artworks that were stolen from all of the Jewish families in Paris. And, so her memoir is only available in French. And luckily, I do speak French. I do find reading quite slow, so I had to do that 1 chapter a day over a couple of weeks. And to read her descriptions of, there was a room in the museum that she named the Salle des Martyrs, which is the room of the martyrs, and it was where the Nazis sent all the art that they termed degenerate. So the Impressionists, your Van Goghs and your Degas and your Monets and your Manets. And just this idea that these artworks were martyrs was, such a touching and almost heartbreaking idea. And so when I travelled to Paris and visited the Jeu de Paume, it's obviously laid out differently to how it was during the war, but I had a map from the 1940s, so I knew where the Salle des Martyrs was located. So I went and kind of stood in that part of the museum, and I don't know, I mean, to me, it still felt like it was a bit haunted. So it was quite a immersive research experience, I guess. And also at the museum, you can actually see through the arched windows the Eiffel Tower, and I happened to be there at sunset one day, and see this beautiful sunset and the Eiffel Tower, backdropped by an orange sky, and made me wonder how it must have felt to be Rose Valland standing in that same window, looking out at this kind of symbol of France, but having a Nazi over her shoulder. So yes, very immersive. I also did a little bit of, I guess, slightly more fun research, where I traveled down to the French Riviera, because when you write a book called The Riviera House, it's important to go to the French Riviera. And I travelled around to a lot of the beautiful Riviera towns and ended up staying in a villa that was once owned by F. Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, actually. So I did what you need to do if you're staying in a place like that, and I relaxed in the bar with a martini. finding these almost forgotten women from history and resurrecting them and their stories and hopefully bringing them to life in my novels. You know, people like Catherine Diop in The Paris Secret and people like Rose Valland in The Riviera House. I think they're incredibly brave and courageous, and you know, because history tended to be written by men, not enough is known about them. So I find it very inspiring to research and to write about them, and I hope that other readers do too. And also, I love the idea that in some ways historical fiction shows us how far we've come and how much things have changed, but also often, you know, how far we still have to go. I mean, there are still so many artworks from the Second World War still missing today. Families are still trying to recover these heirlooms, these precious pieces of cultural heritage that have been stolen and lost. So I love that reflection on the past still being very present, I suppose. The research, I mean, I love the research, but with this one, the papers relating to the theft of artworks by the Nazis during the Second World War are stored in 35 different archives across 10 different countries. So it's a mammoth undertaking to say, oh, I'm going to research this part of history. And in line with that, I felt sometimes almost overwhelmed by the obligation to the people who suffered, particularly those Jewish families who had these, you know, priceless art collections that they'd gathered for decades stolen from them. And, you know, writing about that is no small thing. So I wanted to make sure that I researched properly and thoroughly so that I felt that I had honoured those families as well. And when you are faced with, as I say, 35 archives in 10 different countries, it can be quite daunting at times. So the biggest challenge was to take a deep breath, to swallow, to know that I couldn't possibly read everything, but that I had to read and learn enough. And I feel like in the end, I did hopefully achieve that. Couple of things. I mean, firstly, I would love them to feel inspired by Rose Valland and to feel inspired to then go and find out more about her. I mean, one of the things I love about when I hear from my readers who say that, oh, I read The Paris Secret and then I spent 2 hours researching Catherine Dior. So I hope that, you know, some readers might feel compelled to do the same thing here. And also I think that, I mean, I wrote this book as a bit of a love letter to art and the power of art to give us hope, I guess, in bleak times. And, you know, so many of us are having a very bleak time right now with COVID and lockdowns. So perhaps this book can somehow be a part of giving them some hope. And I guess finally, again, given the times we're living in, we can't physically travel to the French Riviera, but maybe we can travel vicariously there through a book like The Riviera House. Grab your signed copy of The Riviera House at Booktopia now.